After 7 years at the helm, Bill Snyder had taken Kansas State from the depths of futility to being a perennial bowl team, even with a 10-win season under their belt. But the Wildcats weren't done. The Wildcats were past the stage of simply winning more than they lost. They were going for it all. In fact, they were about to start one of the most successful runs in college football. The Wildcats strolled into their new conference riding high. They returned the Big 8 Defensive Freshman of the Year Travis Oaks and Thorpe Award finalist Chris Canty from a defense that led the nation in total defense. Their offense returned an experienced line and star receiver Kevin Lockett. In fact, since 1990, the Wildcats boasted a 32-4-1 record at home. Long gone were the days of being a doormat. But the best was yet to come. The Wildcats began their inaugural Big 12 season with high expectations, being ranked 21st in the preseason AP poll and as high as 11th by Sports Illustrated. But the Big 12 was a different animal than the Big 8. The conference was split into North and South divisions. Kansas State was one of 6 teams in the North Division, all of whom were in the old Big 8. Colorado, Iowa State, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska being the other 5. The South consisted of the 4 newcomers from the old Southwest Conference and the 2 Oklahoma schools from the Big 8. The Wildcats defeated Texas Tech in their inaugural Big 12 game and proceeded to blow out their 3 non-conference opponents. 7th-ranked Nebraska came to town for a top 25 showdown, but the Big Red machine of the mid-90s was nigh unstoppable, demolishing Kansas State. The Wildcats won their next 4 before faltering against 6th-ranked Colorado, whose Butkus Award-winning linebacker Matt Russell helped shut the Wildcats down. K-State closed out the regular season with a win over Iowa State and was selected to play in the Cotton Bowl against BYU. Kansas State scored on a Hail Mary at the end of the first half and on a 72-yard catch by Kevin Lockett to take a 10-point lead into the fourth quarter. All-American cornerback Chris Canty had to leave the game due to cramping, and BYU quarterback Steve Sarkisian took advantage. Sark threw 2 touchdowns in the final period, and Kansas State's Kavanaugh couldn't finish off the final drive as the Wildcats lost 19-15. After the disappointment of a tough bowl loss, Kansas State had to face the reality of losing some serious talent. Gone were All-Americans Chris Canty and Kevin Lockett to the NFL. Quarterback Brian Kavanaugh had graduated as well. But for the first time, Kansas State was entering the territory of teams that reload instead of rebuild. Not only would they be okay without their departing stars, they'd be even better. 1997 began an unprecedented era in Kansas State history, an era in which the Wildcats would win 11 games in 6 of the next 7 seasons, finishing in the top 10 5 times. Offensively, the Wildcats were led by Michael Bishop, a 2-sport star in high school who went the junior college route before signing with Kansas State. Snyder was the only coach who offered Bishop a chance to play quarterback at the D1 level, and Bishop didn't let Snyder down. Snyder tailored his offense around his signal caller's strengths, running a healthy dose of option and letting Bishop sling it downfield at strategic times. Bishop was nothing if not a winner. In '97, Kansas State's only loss was to eventual national champion Nebraska, one of only 3 losses in Bishop's collegiate career. Their 10-1 record earned them a trip to Tempe for the Fiesta Bowl, where they faced off against Syracuse, who was led by a dual-threat quarterback of their own, Donovan McNabb. While both quarterbacks carried their respective teams on their shoulders, it was the Wildcats who thoroughly controlled the game. The Orangemen struck first with a field goal, but Michael Bishop scored 3 consecutive touchdowns for Kansas State. After a couple Wildcat miscues right before halftime, Syracuse closed the half down only 21-15. Bishop iced the game in the fourth quarter with 2 touchdown passes. The K-State defense made McNabb uncomfortable all night, and the 3-time Big East Offensive Player of the Year couldn't find a rhythm as the Wildcats won 35-18. Good for their highest finish of all time, 8th in the final AP poll. Linebacker Travis Oaks was a key component of the Wildcats' defense as he intercepted McNabb and collected a fumble. In '98, Oaks and teammates Jeff Kelly and Mark Simoneau would form one of the best linebacking corps in the country, while Bishop would set all kinds of school records on offense. The Wildcats started out ranked 6th in the AP poll, proof of the respect they were now getting around the country. They were no longer the hunter, they were the hunted. In spite of having a target on their backs for the very first time, K-State started out the year in mid-season form, beating their first 4 opponents by a combined score of 249-21, including a 48-7 pasting of Texas, shutting down that year's Heisman winner Ricky Williams. In fact, the Wildcats cruised through the first 8 games. The only speed bump was a 16-9 win over number 14 Colorado. They were so dominant that on the morning of November 9th, as college football fans opened their newspapers or watched the ticker scrolling on the bottom of the screen while watching ESPN, they would discover Futility U at the top of the college football world. Number 1 in the coaches poll, number 2 in the AP, and number 3 in the brand new BCS rankings. With an offense averaging 52 points per game and a defense allowing a mere 7, all the stars seemed to be aligning just in time for the annual matchup with Nebraska. The Huskers, coming off their 3rd championship in 4 years but struggling to find consistency in '98, had a revolving door at quarterback and settled on freshman Eric Crouch as the starter for K-State. The Huskers were also breaking in a new head coach after the retirement of Tom Osborne, a man named Frank Solich. All of this underscored the importance of beating the perennial powerhouse that was Nebraska. This was it. If it didn't happen now, it would never happen. Kansas State wouldn't be satisfied with a standing ovation from Nebraska fans after a loss this time. No more moral victories. Put up or shut up. Kansas State struggled early as Crouch played like a veteran, throwing a touchdown on Nebraska's first drive. After recovering a Nebraska fumble, the Wildcats responded with a touchdown run by Bishop. After 3 Bishop fumbles led to 10 Nebraska points, the Wildcats drove down the field to close the deficit to 3 before halftime. In the third quarter, Bishop deftly avoided the relentless Nebraska pass rush before finding Darnell McDonald for a touchdown to take the first lead of the game for K-State. The defense continued to defend the Huskers' rushing attack well, forcing the freshman to pass. But Crouch got some more help from his defense as Ralph Brown returned a fumble for a touchdown, tying the game at 24. The freshman showed his mettle, leading the Huskers downfield to a 30-27 lead. But it cost them as the Huskers used their final timeout with over 8 minutes remaining in the game. The Wildcats put the pressure right back on Nebraska as Bishop drove them right down the field, taking the lead back with 5 minutes left. On the ensuing Nebraska drive, on 4th and 9, Travis Oaks sacked Eric Crouch, and though he got a good chunk of his face mask, the ref's flag stayed in his pocket. K-State gave the ball back to the Huskers with mere seconds left. Crouch had one more opportunity. This time, there was no controversy, as Jeff Kelly salted away the biggest win in Kansas State history. It was the Wildcats' first win over Nebraska in 30 years. They were 10-0 for the first time ever, their first 10-win season since 1910, a year in which their schedule consisted of teams like William Jewell and the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy. But now they were defeating the defending national champions and clinching the Big 12 North. Michael Bishop played like a Heisman winner. Jeff Kelly returned a fumble for a touchdown, and Darnell McDonald caught the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter. One thing those 3 guys had in common was that they were all junior college transfers. In addition to smart scheduling, opportunistic walk-ons, and hard work, Bill Snyder had built his empire on JUCO players. The Wildcats couldn't get many blue chippers out of high school, but they could get JUCO guys with lots of experience and an extra year or 2 of maturity. Most of these guys were ready to contribute on day one and ended up being some of the best players of the Bill Snyder era. And as guys like Bishop, Kelly, and McDonald built the empire, demonstrating you could win at KSU, more high school players started giving the Cats a chance. The Nebraska game was the zenith of the '98 season. After beating 19th-ranked Missouri the next week, Kansas State fell to Texas A&M in the Big 12 championship game by just 3 points, losing out on a shot at the national title. And even though they were still ranked 3rd in the BCS rankings, the loss knocked them out of the BCS Bowls entirely. They were passed over by the Cotton and Holiday Bowls as well, falling all the way to the Alamo Bowl, where they lost to Drew Brees and Purdue 37-34. Kansas State's situation prompted the creation of the Kansas State Rule. The 3rd-ranked team would get an automatic BCS bid starting in 1999. In '99, preseason pundits predicted some regression for Kansas State as they lost Michael Bishop, who was the Heisman runner-up in '98, as well as their leading rusher and receiver on offense, and All-American Jeff Kelly on defense. But the preseason pundits were wrong. Jonathan Beasley, who had sat for 2 years behind Bishop, took the reins and led Kansas State easily through most of their schedule, starting 9-0 before falling to Nebraska. And even though the Wildcats beat Missouri the next week, Nebraska won the division by virtue of the head-to-head. Kansas State was off to the Holiday Bowl where they would beat Washington. The game was a back-and-forth affair in which Kansas State finally prevailed thanks to the skills of Jonathan Beasley and a big day receiving from Quincy Morgan, another JUCO guy who finished with 1,000 receiving yards in '99. In 2000, the Wildcats returned a lot of star power in spite of the loss of two-time All-American Mark Simoneau. Mario Fatafehi anchored the defensive line, and Jonathan Beasley and Quincy Morgan returned on offense. Aaron Lockett and JUCO transfer Josh Scobie also looked to be key contributors at the skill positions. The Wildcats started the season ranked in the top 10 and ran through their cupcake non-conference schedule like a hot knife through butter. After starting 6-0 and climbing to number 2 in the country, they hosted a resurgent 8th-ranked Oklahoma, but lost in a shootout to Snyder's former defensive coordinator Bob Stoops. Stoops had raided Snyder's K-State staff when he took over at OU in '99, bringing in guys like Brent Venables and Mark Mangino. Guys that helped Snyder turn around KSU had helped Stoops whip the Sooners into shape in 2 short seasons. The loss was Kansas State's first home loss in 26 games. After beating Texas Tech and losing at A&M, the Wildcats defeated Iowa State before taking on 4th-ranked Nebraska. A win here would put them in the driver's seat for another shot at the Big 12 title. Special teams miscues put K-State in an early 14-7 hole, but the Wildcats were able to take advantage of Nebraska's man defense and took the lead just before halftime on a screen to Quincy Morgan. Neither team was able to move the ball much in the fourth quarter, but Nebraska's dynamic running game finally broke free as the Huskers retook the lead. But Quincy Morgan wasn't done yet, as Beasley hit him for a touchdown with just under 3 minutes left. Now Eric Crouch had to beat the Wildcats with his arm. And he couldn't.
Has a lot of field to work with. This is it. Crouch, looking, throwing, incomplete! Dyshawn Carter may have sent Kansas State to the Big 12 championship game.
Kansas State had beaten Nebraska 2 of the last 3 years for the first time since 1959. And after beating Missouri the next week, they'd get another shot at the other Big Red, undefeated and top-ranked Oklahoma, this time for the conference title. Much like the first game of the season, it was a dogfight. Things were going well until special teams reared its ugly head again, and Oklahoma tied the game before halftime. The heavyweights continued to trade punches. Early in the fourth quarter, the Wildcats were in a big spot. With the game tied, Oklahoma was rolling the dice on 4th and 1. A stop would put K-State in a good position to take the lead. But it wasn't meant to be. The Sooners would score. The defense would hold and they'd add a field goal to ice the game. Once again, the top of the mountain eluded the Wildcats, but they'd continue to try new ways to get to the top. After a dismal 6-6 season in 2001 with a new quarterback at the helm named L. Roberson, KSU returned to form in 2002. K-State ran through their non-conference schedule, which included a win over Carson Palmer's USC Trojans. And it's easy to see why, as the team was loaded with talent. Roberson returned at QB, the diminutive Darren Sproles destroyed defenses at running back, and Terrence Newman covered the field like a blanket and also excelled as a return man. However, after losing 2 of their first 3 conference games by a combined 7 points, the Wildcats were behind the 8 ball in the Big 12 title race. In spite of winning their last 5 conference games, they wouldn't win the division and went on to beat Arizona State in the Holiday Bowl. Another 11-win season, but still no conference title. In spite of boasting the second-best scoring offense and the top scoring defense in the country, KSU was on the outside looking in. In 2003, the Wildcats were still expected to perform well. In spite of the departure of Terrence Newman, Roberson and Sproles were back, as was receiver James Terry, another standout from the JUCO ranks. The Wildcats once again started out the conference slate behind the 8 ball and found themselves sitting at 3-3. But the Wildcats kicked it into high gear, running the table, and this time, they got the help they needed and landed a spot in the conference title game. Their opponent? Once again, the undefeated, top-ranked Oklahoma Sooners. The Sooners were loaded. They boasted the Heisman winner at quarterback, the Butkus Award winner at linebacker, the Thorpe Award winner at corner, and the returner of the year, who returned an NCAA record 3 punts for touchdowns in 1 game earlier in the year. After an early touchdown run by Kewan Jones, it looked like Oklahoma would roll. But from that point on, Kansas State demolished them.
Right in motion. Roberson throws in zone, touchdown, K-State. First down, takes it down the left sideline, wants Terry. Terry's got it. Headed for the end zone, K-State leads it. First down in the pocket on the run, fires, and it's picked off in the end zone. They set the middle screen, and here comes Sproles. First down, midfield, breaks the daylight. In a run for the end zone. This would give a 2-touchdown lead. He's got it. 60 yards on the middle screen to Darren Sproles. Roberson and Kansas State are alive and well.
Darren Sproles had the game of his life, and the defense shut down the highest-scoring offense in college football. Kansas State had done it. They'd reached the top of the mountain. And this wasn't today's Big 12. This was a Big 12 in which Oklahoma and Texas were both perennial top 10 teams. Nebraska wasn't too far removed from a string of national titles and was still capable of winning 10 games a year. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and Missouri were capable of beating anybody on any given day. It was a Big 12 that, from 2000 to 2005, sent 5 teams to the national title game. Kansas State had reached the top. It had sustained a very high level of success for years and won a conference title. From 1997 to 2003, no team from a power conference had more wins than the Kansas State Wildcats. If 1 or 2 balls had bounced their way, they would have gone to a national title game. But how much did Snyder have left in the tank? And what would happen once he inevitably retired? Did the program have enough inertia to carry on? A coach's legacy isn't defined by how he starts, but by how he finishes and what he leaves behind.